The dining room glowed with golden light from the chandelier, the kind meant to make everything feel warm and festive. But all I felt was the chill that came from my father's words. He raised his glass of wine, tapping the rim with his fork so the entire table hushed. The clinking sound echoed like a judge's gavel. My mother smiled tightly, my siblings leaned in, and I already knew, deep down, that this wasn't going to be a toast. "You're a leech," my father said, his voice slicing through the silence. "You can't stay here anymore." A stunned hush fell over the room. Forks froze mid-air. My sister's lips curled into a smug little grin, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. The Christmas tree lights blinked cheerfully in the corner, cruelly out of place against the humiliation tightening around my chest. Inside, I wanted to crumble, but I didn't, because what they didn't know was this. They hadn't broken me, not even close, and what was coming next would leave them speechless. Before that Christmas dinner, before the humiliation that still echoes in my memory, life in my father's house always felt like living in someone else's play, where I was never the star, only the understudy. I had grown up in a family where appearances mattered more than truth. The lawn had to be perfectly trimmed, the silverware polished before company arrived, and every story my parents told about our lives was edited to make us seem better than we really were. But behind the walls, beneath the shine, there were cracks I spent years quietly filling. I worked 2 jobs after college, days in an office cubicle, nights stocking shelves at the local grocery store. Every paycheck I brought in went to groceries, utility bills, and, more often than not, helping cover my father's debts that he never admitted out loud. My siblings knew it, though they pretended they didn't. To them, I wasn't responsible. I was simply convenient. My father had always been a man of power in his small circle. He thrived on control, on being the loudest voice in the room. And my mother? She was the perfect accomplice, soft-spoken, but always ready to back his narrative, even when it wasn't true. They didn't need to tell me I was less favored. I could feel it. It was in the way my younger sister got the new car for her birthday, while I took the hand-me-down clunker with the broken heater. It was in how my older brother was celebrated for investing in his future, while I was ridiculed for taking too long to find stable work. And it was in the smallest, pettiest gestures, my father cutting my portion of dessert just a little smaller, or asking me to sit at the end of the table so the real family could be closer together. Still, I kept giving, because that's who I was. I believed that if I stayed quiet, stayed helpful, stayed loyal, maybe someday they'd see my worth. One night, after a long shift at the store, I slipped into the kitchen and found my mother rifling through the envelope I kept taped beneath a drawer. It was my savings, the money I had been setting aside, dollar by dollar, for the dream of moving into my own place. My father came in just as I caught her hand frozen in the act. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just smirked and said, "We'll consider this rent. You're lucky we don't charge you more." That was the first sting. The moment I realized my sacrifices weren't invisible, they were being exploited. And yet, I still stayed. Because where else was I supposed to go? I carried the weight of the house in small, unseen ways, unclogging the drains, patching the fence when it leaned, keeping the Wi-Fi running when everyone else complained it was slow. Nobody thanked me. Nobody noticed. Until something went wrong, then it was somehow my fault. The pattern was always the same. My father's voice grew sharper with each year. My siblings echoed his tone, picking up the habit of laughing at me in front of friends. My mother would shake her head, her silence worse than their cruelty. But there were also symbols, little things I clung to. On my desk, a faded piggy bank shaped like a frog, a gift from my grandmother, reminded me of her words. "Save for yourself first. The world will take whatever else you let it." Inside that bank, I hid not just coins, but small slips of paper, notes of encouragement I wrote to myself on the nights I felt invisible. In the living room, a family photo album sat on the shelf. Everyone smiled in those pictures, but I remembered what happened outside the frame, the whispered criticisms, the digs that no one else could hear. That album became my proof that the facade wasn't real. And then came the petty humiliation that set the stage for everything that followed. It was my birthday. I hadn't asked for gifts, hadn't expected much, just a cake, maybe. A moment of acknowledgement. Instead, my father stood in front of everyone and presented my sister with an expensive necklace. "She deserves this," he said, his arm proudly around her shoulder. Then he glanced at me, holding out a pair of socks from the discount store. "And here's something practical for you." The room erupted in laughter, my siblings, my cousins, even my mother chuckling behind her hand. I forced a smile, heat burning in my face, and quietly folded the socks into my lap. That night, I stared at the frog piggy bank, gripping it like a lifeline. Somewhere deep inside, a seed of defiance was planted. I didn't know it yet, but that seed would grow into the storm that turned everything upside down. After the birthday humiliation, things didn't calm down. They escalated. My father seemed to enjoy finding new ways to remind me I didn't belong. At the dinner table, he'd ask me pointed questions he already knew the answers to. "Still no promotion? Still living paycheck to paycheck?" Before smirking and turning his attention to my siblings' latest accomplishments. Even my small victories were stolen. When I finally paid off my old car loan, he laughed and said, "Took you long enough. Maybe by the time you're 40, you'll manage a mortgage." My sister rolled her eyes, tossing her hair, while my brother muttered under his breath, "Pathetic." It wasn't just words, it was a campaign. My mother began dropping subtle comments to relatives. "We worry about them. They're just not as capable as the others." At church, neighbors who used to smile at me now looked away, as though they'd been told something I didn't know. Rumors spread, tiny lies crafted to sting, that I was lazy, that I took advantage of my parents, that I had no ambition, and each time I overheard one of those whispers, a fresh knot formed in my stomach. Sleep became a stranger. Nights stretched into endless hours of staring at the ceiling, replaying every insult, every smirk, every reminder that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. My chest felt heavy, as if invisible hands pressed down on me. Some mornings, I sat in the parking lot outside work, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, forcing myself to breathe before stepping inside. I told myself to endure, to keep my head down, to wait for the storm to pass. But storms don't pass when people enjoy fueling them. The breaking point came one evening when I came home to find my frog piggy bank smashed on the floor. Shards of ceramic glittered in the dim light like cruel confetti. The coins I'd saved were scattered, and the slips of paper, my secret encouragements, were crumpled and tossed aside. My father leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on his lips. "Housekeeping accident," he said. "Maybe don't keep junk lying around." My sister laughed as she walked past, stepping deliberately on a shard until it cracked further beneath her heel. I didn't reply. Couldn't. The words stuck in my throat, my vision blurring with hot tears I refused to let fall in front of them. That night, I sat on the floor of my room, carefully collecting the broken pieces of the frog. My hands shook as I held them, but in the silence of my own space, I whispered a promise. This isn't the end. Not for me. Still, in the days that followed, the weight grew unbearable. At work, my manager pulled me aside. "You're distracted. Is something going on at home?" His tone was gentle, not accusing, and for the first time, I felt the dam inside me crack. I didn't tell him everything, but I admitted enough. That things were bad, that I felt trapped, that I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. He listened without judgment, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Look," he said finally, sliding a cup of coffee across the desk toward me. "Whatever's happening there, you need to know. You're not alone. You're better than the way they treat you. Don't let them convince you otherwise." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were extraordinary, but because they were simple. True. They reminded me of something I had forgotten. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't worthless. I wasn't invisible. That night, as I lay in bed, the broken pieces of the frog piggy bank resting in a box by my nightstand, I felt something stir inside me, a faint ember of hope glowing against the darkness. And it was in that fragile, flickering light that I realized, if I wasn't alone, then maybe I could fight back. That was the first time someone reminded me I wasn't alone. The ember of hope I carried after that conversation with my manager was small, but it burned just enough to make me notice the storm gathering. My father wasn't satisfied with humiliating me at home. He wanted to make it official. One Sunday evening, I came downstairs to find my family gathered in the living room. My mother sat stiffly on the couch, my siblings perched on the armrests like vultures. My father stood in front of them, arms crossed, chin tilted high. "We need to have a family meeting," he announced. The words felt rehearsed, like a judge delivering a sentence. I stayed standing in the doorway, unease crawling up my spine. He wasted no time. "This arrangement isn't working anymore. You're not contributing enough. You're draining this household." His eyes burned into mine, daring me to speak. I did. "I pay for groceries. I cover the electric bill, half the repairs." "Bare minimum," he snapped, cutting me off. "We've spoken to a lawyer. Legally, you have no right to be here unless we say so. This is our house, not yours." My stomach twisted. The word lawyer hung in the air like a thundercloud. My siblings exchanged satisfied looks, as though Christmas had come early. My sister leaned forward. "It's not fair to us that you just linger," she said, feigning innocence. Every part of me wanted to scream, to throw the receipts I'd kept, months of proof that I had carried more weight than any of them. But instead, I stood frozen, my throat tight. My mother's silence stung more than anything. She wouldn't even look at me. For the next few days, I walked through the house like a ghost. Every conversation seemed to stop when I entered a room. My father's voice boomed louder on the phone, telling relatives how he was finally putting his foot down. Neighbors began to avoid eye contact when I passed them on the street. The smear campaign was working. I felt cornered, trapped. Every night, my chest ached with the weight of it. But then, something shifted. At work, my manager called me into his office again. "I thought about what you told me," he said. He handed me a folder. Inside were printouts of my pay stubs, a copy of my employee contract, and a typed letter verifying my consistent hours and reliability. "I don't know exactly what's going on at home," he said, "but you need to keep records. People lie. Paper doesn't." His words landed like a lifeline. Records, proof. The very thing my family never thought I had. That night, I dug through drawers, shoeboxes, and desk folders until I had a pile on my floor. Receipts for every grocery trip, bank statements showing payments I'd made toward utilities, even text messages from my father asking me to cover bills he forgot. Piece by piece, I built my defense, not just against lies, but against years of erasure. And then, the hidden advantage surfaced. Buried in an old folder my grandmother had given me years ago, I found a yellowed envelope labeled in her careful handwriting, "For when you need it most." Inside was a photocopy of the deed to the house. My grandparents had helped pay off the mortgage decades ago, and in return, a portion of ownership had been signed over to the family as a whole, including me. My hands trembled as I read the fine print. They had overlooked this. They had forgotten. But I hadn't. The realization hit me like a rush of oxygen after drowning. I wasn't powerless. The next time my father tried to corner me, in front of the family, waving his voice like a weapon, I didn't flinch. I didn't shout. I simply slid the envelope across the table. "What's this?" he barked. "Proof," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. "This isn't just your house. It's mine too." For the first time, the smug certainty in his eyes flickered. My sister's smirk faltered. My brother's jaw tightened. Even my mother finally looked up, her face pale. They thought the deed would end the conversation, that I would back down. But instead, it lit a new fire in me. And though they didn't show it, I could feel it. Deep down, they were rattled. But my father didn't stop. He doubled down. Because men like him don't give up control willingly. And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't going to be a quiet war. It was about to explode. They thought they still had control. They didn't. After the deed incident, the atmosphere in the house changed. Thicker, heavier, charged like the sky before a storm. My father no longer relied on smug smiles and underhanded comments. He escalated to full-scale warfare. If he couldn't silence me with humiliation, he would try to bury me with reputation. It began with phone calls. Aunts and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly left me icy voicemails. "How could you threaten your own father like that?" Don't forget who raised you cousins unfollowed me online, posting vague statuses about ungrateful family members. At church, I felt eyes on me, whispers curling like smoke behind my back. The story had been twisted, my father claiming I'd stolen documents, that I was plotting to take the house out from under them. He painted himself as the victim of my betrayal, and people believed him because they always had. My mother joined in, playing the role of the quiet, long-suffering wife. "We've done everything for them," she told anyone who would listen, her voice trembling just enough to invite pity. "And this is how we're repaid." My siblings, of course, became his soldiers. My sister flooded social media with cryptic posts about leeches and backstabbers. My brother told neighbors outright that I was trying to evict our parents. Each rumor was another stone thrown at my back. At first, it worked. I felt crushed under the weight of it. My chest tightened every time I walked into the grocery store, convinced everyone was staring. At night, I jolted awake from nightmares of being dragged into the street, bags packed, while my father locked the door behind me. But then, something shifted. I remembered my manager's advice. People lie. Paper doesn't. So I leaned into strategy. I bought a sturdy binder and began filling it with everything: receipts, bank transfers, utility statements, text messages, every transaction I had covered, every request my father had made, every time they leaned on me financially. Dates, signatures, amounts. It was tedious, but with each page I slipped into a plastic sleeve, my fear lessened. Proof wasn't just power, it was armor. I started documenting conversations too. When my father raised his voice in front of relatives, I calmly wrote down the date and time, summarizing his exact words. When my sister mocked me online, I took screenshots. Evidence piled up like bricks in a fortress, and I wasn't alone anymore. That manager who first reminded me I wasn't invisible? He introduced me to a lawyer friend of his, who agreed to meet for coffee. I went, heart pounding, binder tucked under my arm. After flipping through just a few pages, the lawyer looked up and said, "You've got more than most people who come to me in court. Keep building. You're doing the right thing." Those words fortified me. Therapy followed, a step I resisted at first, but one that changed everything. Sitting across from someone who didn't know my family, who only saw me, I finally heard my feelings validated. What they're doing is abuse. You're not crazy for feeling broken. You're surviving it. Each week, the heaviness in my chest lightened just enough to let me breathe deeper. Meanwhile, the house itself became a battlefield. My father slammed doors louder, stomped through the hallways like a warning. My siblings left messes for me to clean up, daring me to complain. And when I didn't, they accused me of being passive-aggressive. It was a trap in every direction. But I didn't take the bait. Instead, I focused on the binder. Each petty cruelty was fuel. Each rumor, each lie, each insult became another page of proof. The symbolic objects grew heavier with meaning. The broken frog piggy bank now sat in that same binder box, jagged edges wrapped carefully in cloth, a reminder of what they had tried to shatter. The deed copy stayed in a fireproof folder, tucked safely away. Every night before bed, I would place the binder on my desk, run my hand over its cover, and whisper to myself, "They think they're winning. They're not." Because I could feel it. The cracks were widening. My father's voice grew harsher, more frantic, as if even he sensed the ground shifting beneath him. My siblings snapped at each other more often, their alliance fraying under the pressure. My mother's silence stretched longer, her eyes avoiding mine like she knew the truth but couldn't bear to face it. The war was still raging, but for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was preparing. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the day of reckoning was coming. The day of reckoning was coming, and no one could stop it. The day came sooner than I expected. It wasn't in a courtroom, though it felt like one. My father had called another family meeting, this time with relatives present, uncles, aunts, cousins, even a few neighbors. The living room was packed, bodies squeezed onto couches and chairs, others standing with folded arms. The Christmas tree still twinkled in the corner, though its cheer felt almost mocking. I knew what he was doing. He wanted an audience. He wanted my public humiliation sealed once and for all. My father stood at the center, puffed up like a general addressing his army. "We're here because of them," he announced, jabbing a finger in my direction. They've been freeloading, lying, trying to steal what doesn't belong to them. And it ends tonight, gasps rippled through the room. My sister sat with her arms crossed, smug as ever. My brother leaned back in his chair, smirking. My mother stared down at her lap, the perfect picture of weary resignation. I stayed quiet, letting him talk, letting him weave his story one last time. He listed off my supposed failures: lazy, ungrateful, a burden. Each word was meant to slice, to draw blood. The relatives nodded along, some whispering to each other, their eyes hardening against me. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice dropping into a low growl. You're nothing without us. And if you don't pack your things by the end of this week, I'll have you removed. By force, if necessary. The room went silent. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, but my hands were steady as I reached down and lifted the binder onto my lap. Slowly, deliberately, I opened it and set it on the coffee table. Pages of receipts, bank statements, and printouts fanned out like a deck of cards. I turned one page after another, my voice calm and measured. Groceries, utilities, repairs. Every month for the last 3 years, I covered more than half of what this household needed. Here's your signature asking me to do so. Here are the transfers showing I followed through. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. My father's jaw tightened. I continued, sliding the envelope with the deed across the table. And here's proof that this house doesn't belong to just you. Grandmother made sure of that. You ignored it, but I didn't. My sister leaned forward, her smirk faltering. My brother shifted uncomfortably. Even my mother looked up, her eyes wide. I let the silence stretch, then said the words that had been building in my chest for years. You've painted me as a leech. But I've been the backbone of this house. You've tried to erase me, but paper doesn't lie. And I'm done being silent. The room froze. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the clock on the wall, every sound magnified in the stillness. My father's face reddened, his hands trembling as he pointed at me. Lies. All of it. But his voice cracked, just slightly, and that was enough. The relatives who had looked at me with disdain now turned uncertain. One of my uncles leaned forward, squinting at the documents. An aunt whispered, "These look real." The fortress of lies my father had built was crumbling, and he knew it. He slammed his fist on the table, but the sound no longer carried authority. It carried desperation. "You're nothing without me," he shouted. I met his gaze steadily, my voice calm, unshaken. I don't want apologies. I want change. The silence that followed was different. Not hostile, not doubtful, charged with realization. The mask had slipped, and everyone saw what lay beneath. Not a powerful patriarch, but a man unraveling. My siblings avoided my eyes. My mother's lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. My father sank back into his chair, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking in the room. He was. And in that moment I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. After that night, nothing in the house was the same. The relatives left in silence, their whispers different now. Not about me, but about him. I saw it in their eyes. Doubt, disappointment, even pity. My father had wanted an audience to watch my downfall, but instead, they'd witnessed his. The next morning, he didn't storm around the house like usual. No lectures, no commands, no booming voice filling the kitchen. He sat slumped in his chair, staring out the window, hands trembling slightly as he stirred his coffee. For once, he looked small. My mother avoided me, moving quietly from room to room. When our eyes met, she quickly turned away. She didn't defend him anymore, but she didn't defend me either. Her silence was her final choice, and I accepted it. My siblings kept their distance. My sister deleted her posts. My brother stopped smirking when I walked into the room. Without my father's unshakable dominance to anchor them, they floundered, their alliance fractured. And me? For the first time, I felt no urge to explain, no need to prove myself. The binder sat on my desk, closed but still heavy with truth. Proof was no longer something I clung to. It was something I had used, wielded, and survived. It was my shield, and now I no longer needed it every waking moment. Within weeks, I moved out. Not because they forced me, but because I chose to. I signed the lease on a small apartment across town, nothing fancy, but mine. The first night there, I carried the broken frog piggy bank, wrapped carefully in cloth, and set it on the shelf. Beside it, I placed a new one, sleek, unbroken, its belly filled not with coins, but with crisp $2 bills I'd started collecting, the old and the new, side by side, a reminder of what I'd endured and what I'd built. I framed a copy of the deed, not to boast, but as proof to myself that I wasn't powerless anymore. It hung in my living room, a quiet declaration that the narrative of Leech had been shattered forever. Therapy continued, but the sessions changed. No longer just about surviving, they became about rebuilding. Setting boundaries, learning that my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. My therapist asked me once, "What does peace look like to you?" I thought about it. Peace wasn't a silent house filled with tension. Peace wasn't earning love by breaking myself down to serve others. Peace was waking up in my own space, pouring coffee in my own mug, knowing that every bill paid, every choice made, was mine. I started reconnecting with people outside my family, friends I'd pushed away when shame consumed me. To my surprise, many welcomed me back warmly. "We wondered where you went," one said. "We always knew something was off in that house." Their words reminded me, I wasn't invisible, I never had been. I had just been buried under someone else's shadow. As months passed, I occasionally saw my father in town. He didn't meet my eyes, his voice no longer carried the same authority when others were around him. The stories he tried to tell, about me, about how ungrateful I was, fell flat. People had seen the truth that night, and they couldn't unsee it. His downfall wasn't explosive. It was quiet, steady erosion. The man who had once commanded every room now sat on the sidelines, ignored. And me? I kept moving forward. One evening, as I unpacked the last of my boxes, I found the slips of paper I used to keep inside the frog piggy bank. The ones I'd written to myself on nights I felt invisible. I smoothed out the wrinkles, read the words in my own handwriting. "You're stronger than this. You matter. Don't give up." I placed them in a glass jar on my nightstand, not hidden anymore, but displayed, proof that even when no one else believed in me, a part of me always had. When I think back to that Christmas dinner, the smirks, the laughter, the sting of humiliation, I see it differently now. It wasn't the night I broke, it was the night I began. Because in the end, I didn't just leave their house, I left their shadow. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Sure, here's a very short outro-style version. Worth isn't given, it's claimed. Share your story below, because survival isn't weakness. It's strength no one can take away.